Empires didn't fall because they were weak. They fell because they believed they were prepared. Before the First World War began, France stepped toward conflict with confidence. At the heart of its strategy stood a single idea: Plan 17. It was not born overnight, but shaped by decades of fear, pride, and unfinished history. French leaders believed that war, if it came, had to be seized quickly, before hesitation could become defeat. Plan 17 called for immediate action. French armies would mobilize fast, strike hard, and carry the fight into enemy territory. Speed mattered, initiative mattered. Above all, commanders believed that an early offensive would decide the war before modern weapons could turn it into something far more destructive. Alsace and Lorraine were not just borderlands, they were wounds that never healed. Lost to Germany in 1871, these provinces became symbols of humiliation burned into the French national memory. For many, recovering them was not optional, it was a matter of honor. Every map, every plan, every military exercise pointed eastward. The desire to reclaim Alsace-Lorraine shaped French strategy long before 1914. It fueled political speeches, public expectations, and military planning, turning geography into destiny. On the eve of war, the French army appeared disciplined and confident. Soldiers drilled in tight formations, wearing uniforms that reflected tradition more than modern battlefields. Too many officers, courage, and unity still defined victory. This belief ran deep. French commanders trusted that well-trained troops, advancing with determination, could overcome any obstacle. Technology mattered, but spirit, they believed, mattered more. It was a mindset inherited from past wars and soon to be tested. The doctrine guiding French thinking was simple and bold. Offensive à outrance, attack without hesitation. Press forward at all costs. Victory, they believed, belonged to those who advanced relentlessly. But this doctrine carried a dangerous assumption. It underestimated the killing power of machine guns and artillery. French planners believed momentum could break defenses before realizing that modern warfare punished courage without preparation. At the center of this strategy stood General Joseph Joffre. Calm, reserved, and methodical, he embodied the confidence of the French high command. Joffre believed in planning, order, and decisive movement. Under his leadership, Plan 17 became more than a theory, it became policy. Joffre trusted that swift concentration of forces would control the pace of war, forcing the enemy to react, rather than dictate events. In August 1914, France mobilized with extraordinary speed. Railway stations overflowed with soldiers, uniforms freshly issued, rifles slung over their shoulders. Families gathered to say goodbye, believing this departure would be brief. Within days, a civilian nation transformed into a war machine, driven by plans prepared long before the first shot was fired. Mobilization was not improvised. It followed precise timetables designed years in advance by the French General Staff. Every train, every movement, every hour was calculated. French leaders believed that speed itself was decisive, that the army which moved first would control the opening phase of the war. While France focused its strength toward the eastern frontier, Germany pursued a radically different vision. The Schlieffen Plan aimed to avoid a direct clash, instead sweeping through Belgium with massive force. It was a strategy built on speed, surprise, and encirclement rather than honor-bound confrontation. This strategic contrast proved critical. French planners underestimated both the scale and velocity of the German advance. As a result, France's northern defenses were thin and unprepared, leaving a dangerous gap just as the war entered its decisive opening weeks. As French soldiers marched toward the eastern border in 1914, confidence filled the ranks. Many believed the war would be short and decisive. They marched not only with weapons, but with faith in their leaders, their training, and the belief that courage could shape history. Yet this moment marked the final pause before reality intervened. The optimism of the march would soon collide with the brutal efficiency of modern warfare. Strategy, conviction, and preparation were about to be tested at a cost far greater than anyone had imagined. In August 1914, French forces launched their long-anticipated offensive into Alsace. This was the moment French planners had prepared for: a direct advance, meant to reclaim lost territory. Soldiers crossed the border with determination, believing speed and resolve would overwhelm German defenses before they could fully react. Yet the battlefield told a different story. German positions were stronger than expected, well-organized and deeply entrenched. What was meant to be a swift advance slowed almost immediately, exposing the limits of French assumptions about offensive warfare. As French infantry moved forward, they encountered a devastating reality. German machine guns swept across open ground with relentless efficiency. Entire units found themselves pinned down, unable to advance or retreat without suffering severe losses. The doctrine of aggressive attack collided with modern firepower. Courage alone could not overcome steel and bullets. This was one of the first signs that the nature of war had fundamentally changed. Repeated frontal assaults brought little progress. French formations, designed for movement and momentum, struggled against fortified positions. Coordination broke down as officers tried to adapt plans that no longer fit the battlefield. Each failed attack weakened confidence in Plan 17. What looked decisive on paper proved dangerously inflexible under fire, revealing a gap between theory and reality. Artillery quickly reshaped the battlefield in ways French planners had not fully anticipated. Heavy shells tore into open ground, destroying formations before infantry could advance. Fields became zones of destruction rather than movement. Soldiers learned that survival now depended on cover, timing, and coordination rather than bold charges across exposed terrain. Machine guns and artillery together controlled the rhythm of combat. Infantry attacks stalled under concentrated fire, forcing commanders to reconsider every assumption about speed and momentum. Modern warfare had shifted power decisively toward defense, and the French army was paying the price for learning this lesson too late. By late August 1914, French units began retreating from positions they had struggled to take. Exhausted soldiers withdrew under constant pressure, carrying wounded comrades and shattered expectations. What had been planned as a confident advance now turned into a careful effort to avoid collapse. Retreat marked a profound psychological shift. Plan 17 had assumed forward movement as inevitable. Pulling back was never part of the vision, and its necessity forced French commanders to confront the reality that the war would not follow their plans. Inside French headquarters, confusion and urgency filled the air. Officers examined maps that no longer reflected reality, trying to track enemy movements unfolding faster than expected. Reports from the front were fragmented, often delayed, making clear decisions increasingly difficult. The High Command faced a crisis of adaptation. Strategies built for offense now required rapid revision. Every arm mattered, as hesitation risked allowing German forces to exploit weaknesses across the front. While French forces struggled in the east, the German army advanced through Belgium with speed and coordination. Massive columns moved along roads and railways, supported by artillery and logistics carefully planned years in advance. This maneuver threatened to outflank the French army entirely. It revealed the greatest weakness of Plan 17, the failure to fully anticipate the scale and intent of the German northern advance. In northern France, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Allied forces were forced into retreat as German pressure intensified from multiple directions. Roads became crowded with withdrawing units, artillery columns, and supply wagons struggling to stay organized. Commanders attempted to slow the enemy advance while preserving their forces, knowing that disintegration at this stage could lead to total encirclement. This was not a complete collapse, but it was dangerously close. Strategic control slipped away as communication failed and formations broke apart. The speed of the German advance exposed how vulnerable the northern flank had become, placing the entire French position at risk. As the front moved southward, civilians were pulled into the unfolding disaster. Families abandoned their homes, carrying what they could on carts or on foot. Refugees shared roads with retreating soldiers, blurring the line between battlefield and civilian life. Fear spread faster than official news, driving entire communities to flee. Their flight revealed a new reality of modern war. Military decisions now reshaped society itself. Strategy no longer remained confined to generals and armies. It disrupted daily life, uprooted populations, and turned civilians into victims of decisions made far from their homes. By early September 1914, German forces were approaching the outskirts of Paris. The capital stood not only as France's political center, but as a powerful symbol of national survival. Its apparent vulnerability sent shockwaves through the government, the military, and the civilian population. This moment marked the strategic failure of Plan 17. What was designed as an offensive doctrine had instead allowed the enemy to advance deep into French territory. The threat to Paris forced immediate reassessment at the highest levels of command. Facing the possibility of defeat, the French army began a rapid reorganization. Units were regrouped, weakened formations reinforced, and command structures adjusted to stabilize the front. The emphasis shifted away from rigid offensive doctrine toward coordinated defense and controlled maneuver. This transformation was driven by necessity. Flexibility replaced dogma as commanders adapted to battlefield realities. The French army began learning how to survive modern warfare, setting conditions for resistance rather than collapse. By the end of 1914, Plan 17 had effectively ceased to exist. Its core assumption that decisive offense would bring rapid victory had been shattered by machine guns, artillery, and modern defensive tactics. In its place emerged trench warfare across the Western Front. France entered a new phase of the conflict, defined not by swift movement, but by endurance, attrition, and industrial-scale war that would last far longer than anyone had predicted. By late 1914, the war on the Western Front had fundamentally changed. Rapid movement gave way to static defense as both sides dug into the ground. Trenches stretched across fields and hills, creating continuous defensive lines. What began as temporary shelter soon became permanent fortifications, marking the birth of trench warfare. This transformation was driven by necessity. Machine guns and artillery made open movement deadly, forcing armies to protect themselves underground. The battlefield froze in place, locking both sides into a struggle that neither had originally planned. Life inside the trenches was harsh and exhausting. Soldiers lived in narrow, muddy spaces, constantly exposed to rain, cold, and disease. Daily routines included cleaning weapons, standing guard, and writing letters home during brief moments of calm. Despite the conditions, discipline remained essential. Survival depended on routine and cooperation. Trench life tested endurance more than bravery, reshaping soldiers' understanding of what warfare truly demanded. Between opposing trenches lay no man's land, a devastated strip of ground filled with craters, barbed wire, and debris. Crossing it meant exposure to enemy fire, making even short advances extremely costly. This empty space symbolized the stalemate of trench warfare. It separated armies physically and psychologically, reinforcing the defensive nature of the conflict and limiting opportunities for decisive breakthroughs. Barbed wire became one of the most effective defensive tools of trench warfare. Stretched in dense layers across no man's land, it slowed attacking infantry and forced them into exposed positions. Soldiers attempting to cut through wire often came under direct fire, turning movement into vulnerability and reinforcing the dominance of defense over attack. Its widespread use reflected a major shift in military thinking. Defense was no longer passive. It was carefully engineered to absorb assaults, break momentum, and inflict losses before attackers could even reach enemy trenches. Artillery preparation became central to trench warfare. Massive guns fired for hours or even days before an assault, intended to destroy enemy defenses and cut barbed wire. The landscape was torn apart, reshaped into craters and mud by continuous shelling. Despite its power, artillery rarely delivered decisive breakthroughs. Bombardments damaged terrain more than defenses, often leaving attackers struggling across shattered ground while defenders remained protected underground. Before an attack, infantry waited inside trenches in tense silence. Soldiers checked equipment, fixed bayonets, and listened as artillery fire slowly lifted. These moments stretched endlessly, filled with uncertainty and anticipation. Such waiting defined the psychological burden of trench warfare. Courage was no longer shown through rapid movement, but through discipline and endurance in the face of fear and prolonged exposure to danger. Many trench assaults ended in failure despite careful preparation. Attacking infantry struggled through mud, shell craters, and tangled barbed wire while under constant enemy fire. Progress was slow and costly, often measured in only a few meters. These assaults revealed how defensive systems had gained overwhelming advantage over traditional offensive tactics. Each failed attack forced commanders to confront an uncomfortable truth. Determination and bravery alone could no longer secure victory. The battlefield now rewarded preparation, protection, and firepower, not momentum or heroic advance. French commanders gradually adjusted their approach to the realities of trench warfare. Emphasis shifted towards strengthening defenses, improving coordination, and selecting limited objectives that could be realistically achieved under heavy fire. This adaptation marked a profound change in military thinking. Survival and sustainability replaced pre-war ideals of rapid offense as strategy became focused on holding ground rather than seizing it. To preserve combat effectiveness, French units were regularly rotated between frontline trenches and rear positions. This system aimed to reduce exhaustion, illness, and psychological strain caused by constant exposure to danger. Even brief periods away from the front allowed soldiers to rest, reorganize, and regain strength before returning to the trenches. Rotation reflected a new understanding of warfare. The conflict was no longer about short campaigns, but long-term endurance. Maintaining manpower and morale became as important as tactical success on the battlefield. Machine guns fundamentally altered the balance of power in trench warfare. Positioned to cover open ground, they dominated no man's land and made frontal advances extremely costly. Defensive firepower now controlled movement across the battlefield. As technology advanced, tactics were forced to change. Commanders had to rethink coordination, timing, and infantry roles within a battlefield shaped by industrial weapons rather than traditional maneuver. By 1915, the Western Front had become largely static. Continuous trench systems stretched from the North Sea to Switzerland, limiting movement and reducing battles to small territorial gains measured in meters. This stalemate defined the character of the war. Neither side could achieve a decisive breakthrough, locking armies into prolonged confrontation with no clear end in sight. As trench warfare continued, the conflict evolved into a war of attrition. Success was no longer defined by territorial gains or rapid offensives, but by the ability to exhaust the enemy over time. Manpower, ammunition, food supplies, and industrial output became decisive factors, transforming the battlefield into a test of national endurance rather than tactical brilliance. For France, this marked a complete transformation in strategic thinking. Pre-war faith in speed and offensive spirit gave way to a harsh reality shaped by prolonged defense and sustained effort. Survival depended on coordination, industrial capacity, and the ability to endure relentless pressure in a war with no quick resolution. After World War I, France emerged victorious but deeply scarred. Entire regions lay in ruins, farmland was destroyed, and millions of families mourned lost relatives. The physical devastation was matched by psychological trauma, as the nation struggled to rebuild while carrying the memory of unprecedented violence. Victory did not bring peace of mind. The cost of survival had been enormous, leaving French society determined to prevent another catastrophe. This collective memory would shape political and military decisions for decades to come. Across France, war memorials appeared in towns and villages. Names of the fallen were carved into stone, serving as permanent reminders of sacrifice. These monuments reflected a society deeply aware of what another war might demand. Remembrance became part of daily life. Ceremonies reinforced a shared vow. Never again should France endure such destruction. Memory itself became a force in national policy. A tense post-war Germany, streets filled with protesting citizens, damaged buildings hinting at war scars, propaganda posters on walls, gray skies casting a somber mood, cinematic lighting highlighting despair and unrest, realistic historical detail, focus on human emotions and societal tension, 1920s European urban setting. Close-up of anxious German families at home, children looking worried, adults discussing economic hardship, old furniture and newspapers scattered around, shadows emphasizing uncertainty, warm yet muted color palette, cinematic storytelling, historically accurate clothing and interiors, conveying a nation haunted by war and reparations. The Maginot Line Fortress in France, massive concrete bunkers stretching along forested hills, soldiers inspecting defensive positions, mist rolling over terrain, cinematic wide-angle view, realistic military architecture, 1930s European landscape, dramatic lighting emphasizing vigilance and anticipation of attack. Interior of a Maginot Line bunker, dimly lit corridors, soldiers preparing artillery, maps and plans on walls, tense atmosphere, cinematic depth of field, realistic textures of concrete and steel, historically accurate uniforms, portraying both security and underlying vulnerability of static defenses. Crowded streets in 1920s Germany during hyperinflation, citizens carrying baskets of food, long queues, distressed expressions, torn posters on walls, cinematic wide shot with gray skies, historical accuracy in clothing and urban decay, conveying economic despair and social chaos. Close-up of a worried German family at a market, old banknotes in hand losing value, children clinging to parents, muted color palette, realistic 1920s clothing and surroundings, cinematic lighting highlighting anxiety and struggle, emphasizing human impact of economic collapse. Wide shot of French Maginot Line defenses, concrete bunkers, barbed wire, soldiers patrolling, autumn mist, cinematic perspective showing scale and strength. Historically accurate 1930s military equipment and uniforms, highlighting strategic yet rigid defenses. Interior of a Maginot Bunker command room, officers studying maps, tension on faces, dim lighting casting shadows, artillery equipment ready, cinematic depth of field, historically precise, emphasizing the illusion of security and underlying vulnerability. German city streets post-WWI, ruined buildings, children playing among rubble, adults expressing frustration and anger, cinematic wide shot, muted colors. Historically accurate 1920s urban scenery, conveying despair and societal tension. Close-up of a German family in a small apartment, parents discussing politics with anxious expressions. Newspapers with headlines about reparations, shadows and warm lighting emphasizing hardship, historically accurate interiors and clothing, showing psychological impact of national trauma. Aerial view of Maginot Line fortifications, trenches, anti-tank obstacles, soldiers patrolling, autumn landscape, cinematic lighting emphasizing strategic scale. Historically precise 1930s French military uniforms and equipment, showing disciplined but static defense. Inside a Maginot Bunker observation post, soldiers using binoculars, maps and radios on tables. Tense atmosphere, cinematic depth of field, realistic 1930s military gear, shadows highlighting preparedness, but rigidity, illustrating vulnerability to dynamic attacks. German street protest in the 1920s, crowds waving flags, banners with political slogans, tense atmosphere, cinematic wide shot, historically accurate clothing, urban architecture showing post-war damage, muted and dramatic lighting emphasizing unrest. Close-up of passionate protesters shouting, fists raised, young and old participating, newspapers scattered, cinematic focus on faces, realistic 1920s German attire and expressions, highlighting social tension and political radicalization. French Maginot Line with soldiers reinforcing bunkers, artillery in position, trenches dug, cinematic perspective showing scale and depth, realistic 1930s military equipment, autumn landscape, highlighting rigid yet confident defense. Interior of Maginot Bunker with officers coordinating, maps and radios on tables, soldiers preparing weapons. Cinematic lighting emphasizing shadows and tension, historically accurate uniforms and gear, conveying the illusion of security versus modern warfare threats. Crowded German city street, 1920s, citizens in distressed expressions, political pamphlets. Young activists distributing leaflets, cinematic wide shot, muted colors, historically accurate clothing and architecture, showing social unrest and rise of extremist movements. Close-up of a German family reading newspapers about reparations, parents worried, children observing, cinematic depth of field, realistic interiors and clothing of 1920s Germany, emphasizing psychological impact of national trauma and political tension. French Maginot Line fortifications, aerial view showing scale, soldiers patrolling, Anti-tank obstacles, cinematic perspective, historically accurate 1930s military uniforms and artillery, autumn landscape, highlighting disciplined yet static defense. Inside a Maginot Bunker control room, officers studying maps, soldiers at attention. Dim lighting and shadows creating tension, cinematic depth of field, realistic equipment and uniforms, illustrating vulnerability of static defenses to modern, mobile warfare. In May 1940, Germany launched a sudden and overwhelming offensive against Western Europe. Armored divisions crossed borders at unprecedented speed, combining tanks, aircraft, and infantry into a single, coordinated strike. This was blitzkrieg lightning war designed to shock, confuse, and collapse enemy defenses before they could react. The invasion shattered old assumptions about warfare. Traditional defensive planning proved useless against speed and coordination. As German forces advanced rapidly, communication lines broke down, command structures failed, and the balance of power in Europe began to tilt dramatically in just a matter of days. French commanders believed the Ardennes forest was impassable to large armored forces. Light defenses were left behind, guarded by second-line units. This critical miscalculation would soon prove fatal, as German panzer divisions moved through the dense terrain faster than anyone had anticipated. The belief that geography alone could protect France reflected outdated thinking. While attention focused elsewhere, German tanks advanced through the Ardennes almost unopposed. The heart of French defensive planning was quietly bypassed, opening a direct path into the country. As German forces closed in, Allied troops were pushed toward the coast at Dunkirk. Trapped between land and sea, thousands awaited evacuation under constant air attack. Smoke filled the sky as soldiers stood in shallow water, hoping rescue would arrive in time. Operation Dynamo became a desperate race against annihilation. Civilian boats joined naval vessels to save trapped soldiers. Though the evacuation preserved manpower, it also symbolized a massive strategic defeat, an army forced to flee instead of fight. In June 1940, German troops entered Paris without a major battle. To avoid destruction, the French government declared the city open. Soldiers marched through iconic streets as civilians watched in silence. The occupation marked a profound psychological defeat, symbolizing the rapid collapse of French military confidence and the failure of its pre-war strategic assumptions. Paris did not fall through resistance, but through exhaustion and strategic paralysis. As German forces advanced uncontested, flags were replaced overnight, and authority shifted instantly. The image of enemy troops in the capital sent a shockwave across Europe, proving that France's defenses had failed not gradually, but suddenly and completely. French and British forces began a chaotic retreat as German units advanced faster than expected. Roads filled with soldiers, vehicles, and refugees moving under constant air attack. Command structures collapsed, communication failed, and units withdrew without coordination. The retreat exposed the inability of Allied forces to adapt to fast, mobile warfare. What followed was not an organized withdrawal, but a strategic breakdown. Defensive lines dissolved before they could be reinforced, and morale deteriorated rapidly. Despite acts of bravery, the absence of unified leadership and modern doctrine turned retreat into collapse, allowing German forces to maintain momentum and control the tempo of the campaign. The Maginot Line was designed to stop another German invasion, built with massive concrete fortresses and heavy artillery. Yet in 1940, it was largely bypassed rather than destroyed. German forces avoided the strongest defenses, advancing through unexpected routes and rendering France's most expensive military project strategically irrelevant. The failure of the Maginot Line was not a failure of engineering, but of thinking. French strategy assumed war would resemble the past, relying on static defense and fixed positions. German mobility and coordination exposed the danger of preparing for the previous war instead of the next one. Inside German command posts, officers monitored the rapid advance with constant radio updates and detailed maps. The speed of success exceeded expectations. Clear objectives, flexible planning, and decisive leadership allowed German forces to exploit every weakness, maintaining pressure and denying the Allies time to reorganize or respond effectively. German command culture emphasized initiative and rapid decision-making. Field commanders were encouraged to adapt rather than wait for orders. This flexibility contrasted sharply with rigid Allied structures, allowing Germany to control the pace of the campaign and transform battlefield success into total strategic collapse. German air power played a decisive role in the 1940 campaign. The Luftwaffe targeted roads, bridges, supply columns, and retreating troops, disrupting movement and communication. Constant air attacks intensified confusion on the ground, preventing organized resistance and amplifying the psychological pressure on already overstretched Allied forces. Air superiority allowed German forces to dictate the rhythm of battle. Bombing runs isolated frontline units, cut reinforcements, and turned retreats into chaos. The coordination between aircraft and ground forces demonstrated a modern style of warfare that the Allies were unprepared to counter effectively. As German forces advanced, millions of French civilians fled their homes in panic. Entire families moved south along overcrowded roads, carrying only what they could transport. Villages emptied, cities became gridlocked, and fear spread faster than official information, reflecting the sudden collapse of public confidence. This mass exodus, known as the Exode, revealed how deeply the invasion shattered civilian life. Refugees mixed with retreating soldiers, blocking military movement and worsening the crisis. War was no longer distant or abstract. It had entered homes, farms, and everyday existence across France. German armored divisions pushed rapidly through the Ardennes, a region long believed unsuitable for large tank formations. Narrow forest roads did not slow the advance. Speed, surprise, and constant movement overwhelmed weak defenses, allowing German forces to break through Allied lines and drive deep into French territory. The Ardennes breakthrough shattered decades of military doctrine. What French planners dismissed as impossible became decisive reality. By concentrating armor and maintaining momentum, German commanders bypassed strongpoints, isolated enemy units, and transformed a tactical gamble into a strategic catastrophe for France. Isolated French units attempted to halt the advance with artillery and small arms. Lacking air support and coordination, they fought delaying actions under intense pressure. Despite determination and courage, these defenses were overwhelmed, highlighting the gap between individual bravery and failed overall strategy. These final stands were acts of resistance, not recovery. Without clear orders or reinforcements, French positions collapsed one by one. The inability to regroup or counterattack allowed German forces to maintain initiative, proving that tactical valor alone could not reverse strategic collapse. By June 1940, France requested an armistice. In just 6 weeks, one of Europe's most powerful nations had been defeated. The speed of collapse stunned the world and demonstrated how modern, mobile warfare could destroy traditional armies faster than anyone had imagined. The fall of France reshaped the course of World War II. It confirmed that preparation for past wars offered no protection against new ones. Strategy, adaptability, and speed had replaced fortifications and tradition, leaving a lasting lesson for future generations of military planners. When the war ended in 1945, Europe was left physically and morally shattered. Cities lay in ruins, economies collapsed, and millions were displaced. The destruction revealed the true cost of strategic failure and total war, reminding future generations that military miscalculations do not end on the battlefield, but continue to shape civilian life long after the fighting stops. Post-war Europe stood as a warning carved into stone and rubble. The rapid collapse of nations during World War II demonstrated how fragile stability could be. Reconstruction required not only rebuilding cities, but rebuilding trust, institutions, and a shared understanding that peace demanded adaptation, cooperation, and lessons honestly learned from past failures. After the war, the Maginot Line remained largely intact yet strategically meaningless. Once considered a symbol of security, it became a monument to outdated thinking. Its concrete walls survived, but the strategy behind them failed, illustrating that strength without flexibility offers only the illusion of protection. The abandoned bunkers of the Maginot Line tell a silent story. They remind historians and military planners that preparing for the previous war invites disaster. Technology, doctrine, and human decision-making must evolve together, or even the strongest defenses can be rendered useless by a faster, more adaptable opponent. World War II marked a turning point in the nature of warfare. Speed, coordination, and combined arms replaced static defense and rigid planning. Tanks, aircraft, and infantry operated as a single system, demonstrating that modern war favored adaptability over tradition. Nations that failed to adjust paid the price with rapid and irreversible defeat. The campaigns of 1940 revealed that technology alone was not decisive. Success depended on how tools were used, coordinated, and commanded. Doctrines that encouraged initiative and flexibility outperformed those bound by hierarchy and caution, reshaping military thinking for the remainder of the 20th century and beyond. Outdated assumptions proved more dangerous than enemy fire. Military planners relied on fixed defenses and predictable enemy behavior, believing past victories guaranteed future security. World War II exposed the fatal flaw in this mindset, showing that rigid strategies collapse quickly when faced with innovation and unexpected maneuver. Abandoned command rooms and obsolete battle plans symbolize the cost of intellectual stagnation. The war demonstrated that learning must be continuous. When leaders stop questioning their assumptions, they prepare not for the next conflict, but for the last one, a mistake history repeatedly punishes. Beyond battlefields and strategy maps, World War II devastated civilian life. Families lost homes, livelihoods, and loved ones as cities were destroyed and populations displaced. These human consequences revealed that war's true damage extends far beyond military defeat, leaving scars that persist for generations long after weapons fall silent. The suffering of civilians challenged post-war leaders to rethink the meaning of victory. Rebuilding required more than infrastructure. It demanded social healing and moral responsibility. The experience reinforced a lasting lesson: when strategy fails, ordinary people bear the heaviest burden, often without choice or protection. After 1945, military thinking shifted toward flexibility and rapid adaptation. Lessons from early war failures reshaped doctrine, emphasizing mobility, intelligence, and coordination across land, air, and command structures. Static defenses were replaced by dynamic planning designed to respond to unpredictable threats. This evolution in strategy reflected a broader realization: security depends on learning, not permanence. Nations that embraced innovation and critical analysis were better prepared for future conflicts. World War II thus became a foundation for modern defense planning, influencing military education worldwide. War memorials stand not to celebrate victory, but to preserve memory. Names carved in stone represent lives interrupted by decisions made far from the battlefield. These sites remind future generations that history is written not only by strategy and power, but by human sacrifice and irreversible loss. Collective memory plays a vital role in preventing repetition. Remembering past failures and tragedies forces societies to confront uncomfortable truths. When memory fades, mistakes return. World War II endures as a warning that forgetting history is often the first step toward reliving it. The lessons of World War II extend beyond military institutions. They speak to leadership, adaptability, and responsibility in times of crisis. Preparing for the future requires questioning assumptions, learning from failure, and recognizing that security is not built by walls alone, but by insight and foresight. History does not demand admiration, it demands understanding. The collapse of strategies and nations during the war teaches that complacency invites disaster. By studying the past with honesty, future generations gain the tools to avoid repeating its most destructive errors. From the trauma of World War I to the collapse of France in 1940, history reveals a clear pattern. Nations that clung to outdated thinking paid a heavy price. Through this series, the Insight Vault shows that war is shaped not only by weapons, but by ideas, leadership decisions, and the ability to adapt. The past speaks clearly. The future belongs to those who learn before it is too late. History is not meant to be observed from a distance, but to be understood. If the stories on the Inside Vault helped you see the past more clearly, support the channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing this video. Together with the Inside Vault, we preserve historical memory, challenge outdated assumptions, and ensure that lessons paid for with millions of lives are never forgotten.